Hey there, it's my pleasure to introduce to you for the Today's Leader podcast, the podcast for the leaders and entrepreneurs of today. Please welcome Trish Jenkins from Trish TV and the Shift and Lift Mindset Show. Welcome, Trish.
Thank you, Tony. I'm thrilled to be here with you today.
I'm very excited to be speaking with you today because you've got quite a unique story, and a story that has got so much inspiration there for so many people. And I suppose it's a story that where you develop the concept of the shift and lift the mindset. So without any further ado, Trish, share your story with the listeners of the Today's Leader podcast.
Thank you, Tony. Look, I was very much like your listeners. I had a job in a professional capacity. I had investments. My husband and I had bought houses that we prettied up and got the equity to get the next one and so on. I wasn't always working. I should clarify that. We had investments that supported us, and then I started working for, my jobs were in sales, and then I started working for a fellow in a managed fund.
Yeah.
And we had our own money invested there, but what I didn't know is that he was a thief. He was a crook. And he was stealing investors' money in what is known as a Ponzi scheme, which you may know is when you think that the fund is making money and you're getting a return. It's not. It's actually them giving you a little bit of your own money back or someone else's, and they keep scamming and getting more money in, and eventually it's not sustainable and it implodes.
Yep.
So he asked me to be an authorised representative, which means I'm the person that people talk to about the fund and the investment and put their money through. And that was going very well for a year and a half. And then in 2005, suddenly he stopped paying. And he said to me, oh, the market's done this. And it wasn't guaranteed. So you can't expect a return every month. But he had been returning every month and people had become dependent on it.
Yeah.
And that was difficult. And I had to tell everyone, we are not getting paid this month because of this and this. This is what the fellow says. And that was hard, but it was necessary, and one of those things that you've got to take the bad with the good. Well, second month rolls around, same again. Third month rolls around, and by that time, people are less tolerant. They are more panicky. They are calling, emailing, turning up at my house.
Wow.
Asking, begging, demanding answers. And, you know, Tony, you can mess with people about a lot of things, but not their money.
Yeah.
You know, the only thing people care about more than their health is their money.
Yeah.
And frightened people can be frightening.
Yeah.
And they were scary. And I was not knowing what was going on. My boss was getting harder and harder to find and to answer calls, wouldn't return my calls and so on. And I'm the muggins. I'm the one that people are dealing with. Yeah. And quite honestly, I wasn't trained for that kind of dealings. I just wasn't. And even though I was, technically qualified, they don't put you through, okay, so when things are going badly and people are knocking on your door and making threats, this is how you handle it. It's like, no.
There's not a guidebook for that, I'd imagine.
There really isn't. And anybody that I would have gone to for help, for advice, had their money in.
Wow.
So my professional associates, my accountant, he thought it was fine, but it wasn't. And my resilience drained away during that time. It's what I've learned since is that, you've got to catch these things early, which is also what I teach. But at the time, I was just so stressed. My perspective was shot. Yeah. I couldn't see any way out. And I was in survival mode. And I contacted my boss at last and I said, look, there's money over here. Can I use that just for now to give these people some relief? And he said, all right, do that. And I knew it wasn't the correct way to do things, but in my panic, I could not see an alternative. Yeah. And I think that's what happens with business people when they're really strapped and they might be looking at the superannuation money and they might be thinking, oh, they don't even know how they're going to pay wages that week.
Yeah, very
and
much so.
It's really stressful. And in the cold light of day, you can say, well, I would never do that. Well, maybe you wouldn't, but I just lost my perspective. It's not an excuse. It's just how it is. And I paid them with that money. I didn't steal it. I didn't take it. I paid them.
Yeah.
But I shouldn't have, because that money was earmarked for something else, and that was a breach of the Corporations Act.
Gotcha.
Regardless of what he did,
Yeah.
that's what I did, and I own that. And trust me, I've paid for that. So sometime later, somebody complained to the Australian Securities and Investments Commission about this man, and I was invited for an interview to tell them what I knew about him. And in that interview, I said, look, this was going... it was difficult. It was going badly. Things were tight. So what I did is I used this money to pay people temporarily. So can you tell me how I can I can replace it from my line of credit? Just tell me what to do. Help me to fix this.
Yeah.
And the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, the group, there were three people in the room, and they looked at me and they said, you did what?
Yeah.
And I went, okay. And that's when the tone shifted and I was the one in trouble. Well, very quickly after that, I was advised to go into voluntary liquidation, which is where, if anyone's done that, it's where all of your assets get sold up by a company to put you back on track. And basically they pay themselves their hourly rate until there's nothing left.
Yeah.
That's what liquidation is.
Yeah.
And that took 2 years. So 2 years of our properties getting sold up, mortgages getting paid out. We didn't go bankrupt. We were pretty good at managing our money up until that point. So everything got paid out. And once we were officially cleaned out, then I was served with papers charging me.
Wow.
And charging me with, dishonestly gaining an advantage. They never did establish what the advantage was, but basically it was fraud.
Yeah.
And I can't dress it up to make it look any better than what it is, Tony. I used poor judgment, and it's even hard to say. I misused funds. I paid people when I shouldn't have.
And it's interesting, Trish, because you made the comment that so many people said or would think that why would you do that? But you never really know what you're going to be doing or capable of doing unless you're in that situation. So so many leaders say that they've got integrity, they've got this, they've got that, but when you're actually in a position where you can't see any other way out outside of potentially doing something that may not necessarily be the right thing to do, who knows what people are capable of doing? So I can't even put myself in your position as to what I would be doing, and I'm certainly not going to be sitting here in judgment saying you shouldn't have done that, because I've got no idea what I would have done.
Look, you're absolutely right. And, if I could go, these people who say they have no regrets, wow, if only I could be a psychopath like that. Because I tell you, if I could go back and change it, I would.
Yeah.
But look, nobody getting married believes that they might commit adultery or even get divorced. But it happens. So you don't know. But the important thing, the lesson out of it too, is that's why I teach about resilience, is how to shore up yourself so that you take that self-leadership that you talk about, that you're caring for yourself, and that you see. I've got 2 books out now on the warning signals, what businesses need to know and ask questions they need to ask before they go into business or do an investment or anything like that. So you can offset things by better planning and not being busy.
Yeah.
When you're too busy and you think you're so important that you're just so busy you don't have time to check things out, you're asking for trouble. And that's your ego talking, really. That's
much
just
so.
silly. But anyway, to move things along, I finally went to court in January 2009. So we had 4 years of uncertainty. And in January 2009, the global financial crisis, you may remember, 2008, everyone was touchy about money. And so I was made an example of. And in January, I went to court, and I didn't come home until September.
Yeah.
So that was 8 months incarcerated here in Brisbane, in Australia.
Wow. And from that incarceration has risen the concept of the shift and lift mindset. Is that correct?
That's right. That's right. I didn't know. I didn't sit there thinking, I'll use this as an opportunity to create some sort of program that I can later, offer to businesses.
Yeah, share on stage. This is my golden ticket. No.
Yeah, great. You've gone to jail. Fantastic. No, it wasn't like that.
Yeah.
But look, I did have a couple of decades of personal and professional development to test and draw on.
Yeah.
And I must say that some of those tests failed. Some of that stuff that people tell you is just garbage.
Yeah.
And, it's like, really? It just, and I tried it all. But I learned there are a number of things I already knew to do and other things that I developed and learned. So I knew that I needed to protect my mind. I needed to be very careful about not sliding into self-pity.
Yeah.
Self-pity is your number one enemy. And that you do need to look at what you do have and be grateful. I would think to myself, I'm not on the streets of Calcutta. Now, that sounds very far removed, but how about this? When I looked to my left, there would be a woman who could not read or write. Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why she was in there, because of circumstances that had her in that way. Then I would look to my right or left, what I've said before, but I would look there and there would be a woman who is grateful to be in prison because she's not at home getting belted up every day.
Wow. Yeah.
It was a privilege to see into a world that is the other. There's us and there's them.
Yeah.
And I suddenly was them. And I had to choose how I couldn't avoid it. Yeah. That was it. And you might be in a workplace where you cannot avoid the people around you.
Yeah.
You might not be able to afford to just go and live your dream. You've got a family to feed. You've got responsibilities. Yeah. You might not be the boss. You might not have a choice, or you might be the boss and you've got all this responsibility with these people who are difficult, and you're wondering, I haven't got enough time to even just remember my own name. Yeah. So, it's that self-care is really important. And so I determined as best I could to protect my mental ecosystem. And what I mean by that is your eye gate, your ear gate, your mouth gate, and what churns around inside you. Yeah. You let toxicity in there, such as a resentment, such as an offence. You get offended by what someone says and you chew it over and you talk to someone else, and it will poison you. It goes through a whole ecosystem and poisons everything. That's what will happen to you. So you've got to choose and be in charge of what you think about and how you think about it. Yeah. Yeah. And then I was stuck with these people and I thought to myself, they were just so strange, because I come from an environment that was, respectable, middle class, nice people type stuff, church stuff, that was me. Yeah. And which is extra embarrassing. Pastor's kid, yeah. So you can imagine. And so I had to see them differently. And of course I wanted to save and rescue everyone, which is part of my problem, why I got there in the first place, overstepping and rescuing. But I began to see differently, and I began to see this scary, heavily tattooed, teeth missing, angry person in front of me. When I looked past that and I got to know her and her story, then instead of being afraid, what I felt was compassion. Yeah. And to be able to get alongside someone that is very different from you and just sympathise with them because they've just been told they're not going to get their kids again when they come out. Wow. How do you answer that? I've got no answers. I can't call a lawyer for her. All I can do is just go, and just have that. So taking your eyes off yourself was huge.
I could imagine. And what sort of relationships did you build when you were in prison?
Well, it was a funny thing because you're all in the same uniform.
Mm.
You know, you're all, like I said, it's like instead of being us and them, suddenly I was them. Now, some people took a dislike to me because they how I speak, you know, I've been educated and I speak clearly and so on. Some of them assumed I thought I was better than them.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that classist attitude.
Perception, yeah.
Yeah, which surprised me. I wasn't expecting to encounter that. But as I got to know some of them, I mean, some you never win over. They just have that they just got those issues and you just don't hang out with them, of course. But when I chose to see past things, when I chose to care in an environment, here's something I learned. When you're in an environment where kindness is considered weakness, and you choose to be kind anyway, that's strength.
Yeah.
That's courageous.
Yeah.
And look, I did have my faith, and I would encourage anyone who has any kind of faith, draw on it.
Yeah.
Draw on it. Your spirit, in your gut, your inner man, inner woman.
Yeah.
That essence of who you are. Pay attention to it and nurture it, because it will speak to you and encourage you, and it will give you courage. And so, yes, I drew on my faith and I said, Jesus, you've got to help me here, you know, and I was not ashamed of that. Some people would hide that part of their life because they were so ashamed. But what it meant was I was motivated to encourage. And I know, you know, he who waters will be watered himself or herself.
Yeah.
So when you're an encourager, that takes your eyes off yourself. And that in itself is strengthening and good for your mental health. Plus, it just makes the environment a bit nicer, because some of these people are aggressive people. They're aggressive because they're afraid. I just know all aggression is based in fear.
Yeah.
I don't care how brave you think you are. If you're aggressive, it's because you're afraid of something, or you're, you know, that inner little boy that was abandoned when he was 3 or whatever, that's coming out, and you're scared and you're trying to control because you're scared. Yeah. When you know someone is afraid, you don't have to be afraid of them anymore. You can step aside and feel a bit compassionate.
Very much.
And then the way you speak to them will not be confrontational. You'll be getting alongside them. And I think that's what a lot of employers need to remember, and we'll get into the more the leadership side of things. But it's not about imposing your will on them. It's about what's going on with them. It's about building what's going to work for them. Yeah. You know, how you come across. So I had to learn to see 3 things differently. One is the person in front of me, the circumstances that I was in, and me in it. So there are 3 questions that I always ask, and I did this back then, not really realising I was doing it. How else can I see this person? How else can I see these circumstances? Yeah. Because on the surface, the circumstances were, I have ruined my life. This is pretty official. Like, this is about the end of the line. You know, you can have all sorts of things happen to you and you'll still be able to get a job. Yep. Or form another relationship or something like that. Like, this is pretty bad, and this is public. Like, if someone Googles you, this day and age, you blow it like that, it's on Google. Yep. All they've got to do is look it up. Yep. But then there was the fear of people finding out, you know, that had the shame, the incredible shame. So I had to find another way to look at that, and also looking at myself, because my self-worth was in the trash. Yeah. You know.
So when you've had an experience like that, and it can be draining and overwhelming, and whatnot, and then you come out of that particular situation. So you've come out of prison after, I think, 8 months. And what was the next step for you just to then start thinking or shifting into this shift and lift concept?
Yeah. Well, Tony, that's a really good question, because it wasn't a happily ever after situation.
Yeah.
You know, we go through like, you compare it. I haven't been divorced, but I know plenty of people and friends who have. So I imagine it's fairly similar, where you have that devastation and you have hope for the future, but then you feel bad again. And it's a little bit of a graph that goes up and down.
Yeah.
And knowing what I know now, I would have done it better. but I had to learn.
I think
these
we
things
all would
in
have done it better if we knew what we knew now.
Yeah, we would have.
Yeah.
Look, self-care was a big one. Now, I was very, very fortunate that my husband stood by me. He never once blamed me. I did, but he never did. And he was very tender and very understanding. I would have nightmares. You know, I'd be dreaming that I was still in jail and not supposed to be, because I was supposed to have been let out and nobody would believe me.
Yeah.
You know, that was really scary. And, you know, I didn't know I had PTSD, because I didn't think I qualified for that. You know, I hadn't been to war and I hadn't been assaulted.
Yeah.
But I did start to see a psychologist who was able to help me unpack the trauma and see, look for the benefits in it, but not in a trite way. But he explained to me how PTSD works, and that I would. Well, he actually said, you don't get over it, but I said, no, that's not true, and I have got over it. However, what he did say helped me, and it was like a graph, and every now and again I'd have an episode of rage. But then I would remember, what did I do when I was in there? And I would ask for a new perspective. I would say, how else can I see this?
Yeah.
You know, when my children played up, I'd be like, I'd panic, because I would think they're going to end up in jail because they're having a temper tantrum. Well, they weren't. They're just being 11.
Yeah.
Doing what 11. And I was very careful to sow into their lives, to talk to them at an age-appropriate, age-appropriate times about the experience. So, for example, my Felicity, she was probably about 10, and she said to me, Mum, I wish this hadn't happened to our family. And I said, look, I wish that too. I said, but you know what? There will be kids at your school, and somebody may not have any lunch. There'll be someone else at your school, and Daddy doesn't live at home with them, and they miss him. There'll be somebody else at your school that someone is touching them in a way that they're not supposed to. And I said, you know what? If nothing ever happened to us, how could we be any kind of friend to those kids? You know, you can at least say, yeah, I've been lonely too. You know, I can. It gives you compassion. You know, I said, I didn't put in that. I said, look, what kind of use would you be as a friend if you never felt anything bad? Yeah. And she said, yeah, that's right. Now, that's not to say that what she went through was good, but all things can be turned around and used for our good or for someone else's good. Yeah. And if you look for the gold, you look for the lessons. Treasure is found in dark places. And that's where, when I was incarcerated, I wrote letters and journal entries tracking what I was going through and how I was feeling and what I was doing to lift myself up. And they've since become a book. Okay. And I call it Treasures of Darkness. Wow. So, yeah, I don't always look good in it, but it is my letters, my journal entries. Yeah. Excellent. And it's really precious to me. Treasures in Darkness. That might become the podcast title for this particular episode. Treasures of Darkness. Because that's where they're found. You know, if, how we see determines how we succeed. Yeah. So if we can find a different way to see things, different way to see people who are challenging, different way to see circumstances, that opens up problem solving. Different way to see ourselves. And I had to see myself differently, Tony, because I felt like such a failure. Yeah. However, I had to think, well, what's left? What can I do? You know, what have I got?
So with that experience, you've written a couple of books, you've got Shift and Lift. How do you now use that to help leaders and businesses and I guess people in general? So give me a little bit of the framework of how you work with business with this.
Yes. With business, it's to do with how we get the best out of people. And the old command and control style, it'll get you so far.
Yeah.
But it won't get you loyalty. People will not give you a second an inch more than they absolutely have to, and they will not make suggestions either.
Yeah.
And I've seen studies during COVID of companies that some companies just cut staff willy-nilly and said, this is what we have to do, see you later. And I read a study of a company that sent the memo out and said, look, this is tough. Firstly, we're going to ask, we've made the decision that all the leaders and all the staff, our wages, because we want to keep everybody on as much as we can, we're going to temporarily reduce wages and give people some profit sharing in the company when it comes back. But also, please, if you have a suggestion, we would like to hear from you of what we could possibly do. And that company, and I cannot remember it. I just remember reading it and being really impressed, and I should have saved it. But they got all the suggestions in, and that company blossomed. They went online. They did great and very profitable because they listened. Yeah. And you might be the leader, but it's not all on you. Your people want you to succeed. Yeah. They want the company to succeed because that helps them. When we all want that to succeed, and that's got to come from you as well. And I would ask you, when you see your people, do an exercise in looking past their title, their position, their role, even what they look like, their uniform. Look past that and really look at them. Yeah. One person to another and see them and say to yourself, ask yourself this question, do I care about this person?
Yeah. It's one of the great things that a leader should be doing. People should be their number one focus. And one of the things that I see in really good leaders is that ability to build rapport, that ability to build connection, no matter where they are. There's common ground with each and every one of us. So, and you would have seen that, of course, within your experience within the prison environment. So even though there were people from all economic socio barriers and whatever, all the different demographics that are all sort of put into that position, at the end of the day, there's common bond between people. And we've got to, as a leader, we've got to try and find that, whatever that common bond or that common ground is going to be.
Good.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It's about knowing each of your team, what's going to inspire them, what's going to demotivate them, what's going to get them going the extra bit, because at the end of the day, that's going to help us all because of that performance culture that we start to create. So,
well, that's right. And there are personality tests and things like that where you can find out what motivates this person. And I understand if someone is a certain type of personality, you get to the point straight away. Other people need all the details. But beyond that, and that all sounds a bit hard and a lot of work, and it can be, but really, when you're in front of someone, just see them, acknowledge them, thank them. The scariest thing that happened to me in prison, I'll tell you, the very scariest, the most frightening thing happened to me when I'd been transferred to minimum, and there was a woman who ran the place, and the scariest person was not Big Bertha threatening me, trying to get me to bring drugs in. I was sat across the desk from the woman who ran the minimum security facility. Yeah. And she's sitting there, she's the boss, she's sitting there asking me questions and ticking boxes. Right? She's trying to assess whether prisoner D4268 is going to fit in and how she needs to be managed for security, right? And they didn't call me by the number, but that was the number. On all the paperwork, it was offender D4268.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact number, but there's another thing. I'm labelled offender. Like, that's rehabilitative, isn't it?
Yeah. Makes you feel good about yourself.
Yeah. So she's asking me these questions, and I'm pretty good with the people skills, Tony. I'm pretty good at connecting. So, and I know that her assessment of me is going to carry weight in what I get to do, how I'm treated, what happens to me, my very survival in that place.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to connect, and I'm trying to share a bit about my life, and like I trained as a school teacher, so perhaps I could help with literacy, things like that. And she's just looking at her page, glancing up at me, but I realised when she looked at me, I was invisible. She didn't see me.
Yeah.
She saw prisoner 24568, whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's what she saw. And at that moment, I was frightened because I thought anything could happen to me in here, and all I am is a number.
Yeah. All you are is an offender and a number. And
I am a tick in a box that will be an incident report if something happens.
Yeah.
So, that was more frightening than the woman who tried to get me to bring drugs in.
Yeah.
Because
and the real message that I'm taking from that, Trish, is we have a number of leaders that would treat their team that way, that they're just a number, that they're just part of the cogs of the machine.
Yeah.
And so there's a real message there, because that person is certainly not going to give the best that they can possibly be. In fact, they're probably looking for the best way to escape that particular situation so that they can actually go work with someone that's going to value them.
That's right. And the leader might be thinking, what's the best way I can get rid of this person?
Yeah.
Because what you're thinking of when you're looking at them, are you seeing, like, say they've made a mistake and they're sitting across from you at your desk, and you're the one with the boxes to tick as you quiz them about what they did, what they forgot to do, how much damage that caused. Here's the thing. Are you seeing a person or a problem?
Yeah. Yeah.
You've got to separate the problem from the person, and understand this. That person is afraid of you. They've done something wrong, and you have the power. And if that gives you an ego boost and you love that, go sack yourself.
Yeah.
Shame on you. Go sack yourself.
Yeah.
So was that a bit too much? That's a good go sack yourself.
No, absolutely.
I think I'll use that.
Yeah.
So what you've got to do is if they're afraid, people who are afraid cannot answer you properly. Think back to primary school when the teacher yelled at you when you couldn't spell the word, but you could spell it any other day. You just can't when they're yelling at you.
Yeah.
It's just dumb. So if you want the best out of someone, get a bit self-aware, pull back, take a breath, get a glass of water and think, I'm feeling angry. I can't be feeling angry when I do this. And you've got to ask yourself, do I care about this person? Well, no, I'm angry at them. No, I'm going to choose to care about this person. And that will help diffuse the aggro that you're feeling.
Yeah.
And do the dynamics differently. Go for a walk with them. Sit on the side of the desk instead of having that as a barrier. Because if that person normally knows their job, don't undermine them with this discipline idea. That's crazy. That's just, they want to do well. Give them some more training.
Yeah. Yeah.
Number of retail outlets that don't bother, big retail stores, that the only training they do is how to use the new product.
Yeah.
Don't give them any skills in managing people.
Yeah. And it's one of I come from a retail background, of course, so it's one of the key things that you need to be able to do when you're dealing with the public, being able to work through them. Hey, just a question I suppose, not on notice was during the 8 months in prison. Were you surprised, or was there any surprises in who actually became leaders within that, like, prison community? Within the, like, you talked about Big Bertha, and I'd imagine that there was a fear aspect that a very persuasive part of influence in relation with that sort of leadership. But were you surprised? Were there any surprises who took on leadership roles, or who was respected and who wasn't?
Yes. There were the stereotypes, the ones that are like those movie characters where they have their little group of sycophants around them that, minions that run after them. And I didn't have a lot to do with them. But I had a cellmate who, she was quietly spoken, confident. She was a recovering heroin addict. And she was one, I just watched it happen, where she was quite well read and had a lot to do with lawyers because she'd been in and out of jail for a long time. Yeah. And these women would come to her and hand her a letter from their lawyer, and she would put her glasses on, which transformed how she looked. Like suddenly, because people with glasses look smart. I mean, look at you, Tony. You just look so smart. You're the brainy one between us. So clearly I'm not. But she put them on and she would read it, and she had this posture of just reading with her head tilted, and with consideration. She took it seriously. Nobody paid her. They didn't pay her in cigarettes or anything. She just did this, and I don't think they did. And she read it, and she said, all right, now what you need to tell your lawyer is this. Blah, 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 blah. And they'd be like, okay. And she would just, and they would just, and I watched, I was in awe. Yeah. And I thought, not she's with me, I'm with her. I'm with her. And there was another one, this woman, she a bit more of a lone wolf, but she was over 6 foot, quite androgynous, as in, very masculine, angry looking. There were things about her that made her life difficult in terms of her racial profile and her anger about things. And I didn't at the time know exactly what she was in for, but she's the one. I would talk to her from time to time because I was fascinated. I was so naive. I was like, oh, hello. And one day she came to me and she stood over me and she said, so you've had a visit from your parents? I said, yeah. And she said, can they bring me something? I said, oh, what, like a book? Tony, my parents are pastors. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, a book for the library. I said, maybe they could send it to the library. She said, no, some drugs. Now, what you've got to understand is it's people who look like me that get picked on and made to, threatened to get their family. They say, oh, I'm going to get bashed up if you don't bring this stuff in because I'm less likely to be suspect with the guards. Yeah. Right? And my instant reaction, I didn't even think about it. Can they bring me some drugs? And I just went, there is no way in the world. And you know that moment where you think to yourself, did I just say that out loud? Yeah. Well, then the rest of it came because I didn't know what I was going to say all in an instant. There is no way in the world I would risk getting you into trouble. Now, Tony, as I said, you're the smart one between us. I don't know whether, I think that was a divine intervention. Yeah. And she looked at me and she went, you're worried about me. And I thought, this is working. Yes, there's no way. I care about you too much. And, we became friends after that. Excellent, yeah. And I'm with her. She's a scary lady. Nobody's picking on me. Yeah, yeah. That influence, it was just, but I had influence with her, not because I was big and strong, but because I cared. She had influence because, well, she was quite out there. And there's different ways to do it. But I think the most powerful way, you don't have to change your personality. People are not naturally overly caring. Some people are not so caring, but just to say thank you, just to remember someone and to pause and look at them so they feel valued. They're not an object.
So a couple of messages that I've taken away from what you were just talking through. Obviously, the leadership is influence scenario, but working on your strengths and being proud of who you are. So I get a real kick when I see someone who's really nerdy or dorky owning their dorkiness and being that absolute, for want of another word, the king of the nerds, because that's who they are and that's how and you get this energy from them and you get inspired. So being strong in something like the lady with the glasses and understanding the lawyer, I think is just an amazing thing for leaders to take on. If you're strong at something, make sure that that's part of your toolkit. Make sure it comes out. And then also that aspect of caring for people. All of a sudden there was a shift in that relationship because you indicated a simple "I care for you" moment. And so for every leader that's listening, what is that care for you moment that you can be sharing with some of your team members that maybe you haven't shown before? So, hey, look, time's getting right away from us. So I need to, and I'm going to have to get you back, Trish, because this is absolutely fascinating. And I really would love to dive in some more, but I do have a couple of last questions that we'll just work through. So for yourself, you've written a couple of books. You're an accomplished keynote speaker. You've got Shift and Lift. What's the vision for you going forward?
Oh, well, my vision going forward is to do more of what I'm doing now. That because I've had to go online, my business has actually expanded.
Okay.
So I'm doing. There are chapters of associations in America that they still need keynotes, and they're now used to having someone virtual. So where other speakers were shut down, I turned my garage into a studio. Got some nice lighting. I wanted it to look nice. I wanted it to look like a TV set, so I called it Trish TV. Yep. And I have guests on, so I'm going to grow my vodcast, which is what you're doing, the video and audio podcast, so that it showcases other people as well as my own messages out there, and just keep growing and encouraging and equipping leaders and teams to have a shift and lift mindset, shift from the way we were thinking so that we can lift into a better way of doing things and have more success. And giving them those tools. And when I attach those tools to my stories, they're more likely to be listened to, because the strongest prison bars are in your head. Yeah, I love that. Yep. And you don't have to go to prison to feel trapped, to feel limited. But now it's time for a prison break. And we shift and we lift our thinking, and that transforms our future. Absolutely. And what a fantastic way to finish off. So if people are interested, how can people connect with you? Well, you can connect a couple of ways. Through my website, speakertrishjenkins.com. Please go there. And also, I would love you to visit my YouTube channel. So youtube.com/Trish Jenkins. Just put my name into YouTube and it should come up. Excellent. That's all that's in that. So please do that. And I'd love it if you could subscribe. That'd be great. And there's a lot of resources there as well. And you'll also find my books on my website as well if you're interested. And excellent. If you've got an organisation that you want to bring a speaker in, pick me. Absolutely. Fascinating story. And as I said, I will need to get you back because there is just still so much to unpack with your story and how you use it to work with leaders everywhere, because it is fascinating. During your whole conversation, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about everyone makes mistakes. That was a comment that you made, and man, I tell you what, everyone has more than made enough mistakes. And there was probably a time in everyone's life where you've got this fork in the road. If you go down that way, you're going to end up in prison. If you go down this way, you may not. So I think I chose the may not area at this particular time. But very clearly there was a time in my life that if I continued doing some things that I was doing, I was probably going to end up in that sort of a position. So
I'm sure that there are people out there that are having that same sort of a moment. How would they have dealt with that? How would they have learned from that? How can you come out of that stronger and impactful? And when you're looking at being put into a prison community where you have no say, I'd imagine very little say around who you interact with, the type of people that you are, and then still be able to have that as a positive influence within your life to an extent. Of course, it's, you know, it's not the greatest thing. No one's going to put their hand up to go on holidays in prison, but to have it as a positive influence to help and add value and bring value to others. And then, so with that sort of a concept, I just want leaders to think about the team that they've got, largely chosen teams that you've been able to select, recruit and develop, and really think about how you would like utilize the people that you've got to develop them to be the very, very best. Because it's not until you walk into a team like you would have walked into within the prison community where you've got no choice, where you've got no say. And people fundamentally, probably there was a range of those people within that community that would have said, I don't care for anything that you say. I do this, or this is the way that they're going to deal with it. When leaders look at the people that they're working through, think about how grateful and how lucky you are to have a team that probably wants to be there, probably wants to do the best job that they can, probably want to be developed by yourself, and then start putting those steps into place, because that's going to help everyone. So, Trish, fantastic speaking with you today. As I said, we will come back and we will get you back on, because I just think that's a fascinating story. And thank you so much for investing your time in today's leaders.
Oh, pleasure.